The Zondo report, part one of the three-part report, makes various recommendations as to investigations into individuals and alleged acts that those individuals committed, which might amount to crimes under South African law, and the recommendation is that these are investigated. Stephen Powell is Director of Forensics at ENS Africa. Stephen, broad question. Do you think we will have started any state capture prosecutions in 2022?
John, I'm quite certain that we will. Morning, listeners. Morning, John. I'm quite certain that we will see prosecutions initiated during this year. I think that while the Commission has been sitting, a lot of evidence has been unearthed, and we know that the President endorsed the change in the constitution of the Commission to allow the Commission to share evidence with the NPA. And one of the beauties about how the Commission went about its work is they didn't just hear the oral evidence of the various witnesses, they also subpoenaed the bank accounts of many of these suspects and identified bribe payments that were paid to the accounts of various board members and other procurement officials that are named in the report. And these are, I think, the low-hanging fruit that the NPA should be targeting and considering bringing forward as quickly as possible.
Okay, and the issue of capacity is one that is there, but it's not insurmountable. The capacity of the NPA to investigate properly to the point where a provable case can be made in court.
John, I think that there are a number of very, very capable and experienced people within the NPA that can take these matters forward. You know, you need only think of the example of Billy Dano, who's one of the top prosecutors in the country. There are quite a number of people like Billy within the NPA that have the expertise and the ability. But I think we mustn't lose sight of the fact that resources is a challenge, and investigating and prosecuting complex white-collar crime can be very, very difficult. But a lot of the spade work has been done. And as I said earlier, you know, the Commission subpoenaed the bank accounts of a number of people who are on the wrong side of a money trail. And I don't see how they will be able to explain the largesse and the large sums of money that they've received into personal and business bank accounts. And that shouldn't be too complicated or too difficult for the NPA to take forward and convert into successful prosecutions.
Of the ones that I remember now, of the please look into this and possibly prosecute from Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, investigating Tom Moyane for perjury surely is a really, really simple case to prepare for and bring before a court.
I think that is one of the criticisms levelled at the NPA at the moment, is that, you know, they wouldn't have had to wait for the end of this commission to take action against Tom Moyane, because in fact those findings were already made by the Nugent Commission several years ago. And the same applies to the consulting firm that was implicated in irregularity there. There was the senior executive of Bain that was targeted for prosecution and investigation. And I think it is a travesty that those matters have not already been dealt with. And when I speak about the NPA focusing on the low-hanging fruit, in my view, the NPA should be taking the matters that are simple and easy to take forward and converting them into successful prosecution. So I think you're quite right. You know, that's a good example.
And on the available evidence, it should be an easy case to convince the judge. I don't know whether it would probably be heard by a judge rather than a magistrate. I don't know. But the presiding officer, it should be relatively easy to persuade that person of Tom Moyane's guilt, because it does kind of seem self-evident.
Correct, John. And there are numerous other examples within the report of the Commission, you know, where they have highlighted that large tenders were awarded, individuals who were key decision makers have breached procurement rules, and they've received large sums of money in exchange for that. You know, that type of evidence has been provided to the NPA by the Commission, but I must say, I don't for 1 minute doubt that the NPA has had teams of people working frantically to prepare these cases, to get them across the line, whilst the Commission has been sitting and while it has been making the evidence available. What I must just convey to listeners is that, the prosecution is a completely different ballgame to a commission of inquiry. And the evidence requirements in order to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt is onerous. And it does mean that the NPA has to dot all the I's, get all of the available evidence, conclude its investigation before it places the matter onto the court roll. If the NPA hasn't completed the investigation and they still need to do investigative work and they have to subpoena ancillary accounts or further accounts where payments are diverted to while the matter is on the court roll, then the NPA faces a different challenge, and that is the accused arguing that they are denied the right to a speedy and fair trial. So it's one of those situations where you can't rush it. You have to make sure you do it right. But you should be taking it forward in a way that you deal with the low-hanging fruit.
The mistakes that were made in the original Estina prosecutions, where the judge threw the case out of court in the Bloemfontein High Court because the state was obviously not prepared. We have to avoid that, because the more people are tried and the case thrown out of court or a not guilty verdict delivered, the more people start to doubt the whole state capture narrative. And you really have to make sure that when you bring a case to court, you've got a 98%, a 95% chance of making the charges stick.
Absolutely, John. I agree with that. And I also think it's important to recognize that the Commission hasn't only recommended prosecutions, they're trying to fix the problems in procurement and corruption with tenders holistically. So they've made a whole range of recommendations to address protecting and incentivizing whistleblowers to come forward and speak out, because as we know, whistleblowers have had a torrid history in our country in the past, and they've also spoken, the recommendations are there to establish a fully independent agency. And I must say for myself, I've been arguing for years that the removal of the scorpions was a regressive step. We used to have prosecution-driven investigation, and that was really positive and achieved a lot of good results. So this new agency is quite an exceptional measure. And then there's also the introduction of deferred prosecution agreements for companies to incentivize companies to come forward and speak out when they've had corruption within their ranks. And maybe, John, if I can just explain briefly what a DPA is. A DPA is a deferred prosecution agreement entered into by a corporate. It's like a leniency program with the state where they get the equivalent of a suspended sentence, provided that they fix the problems, remediate and fix the controls that allowed the abuses to happen, that they prosecute the offenders, and that they repay if they have profiteered out of corruption. And with all of those ingredients, they enter into this program, they pay a significant penalty to the state for the offences, and they don't get a conviction, so they're allowed to continue to operate. So individuals, honest employees keep their jobs. There's a lot of positives around this. The DPAs have been used successfully in the United Kingdom and the United States as a mechanism to get companies to behave. And one of the changes to the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act that has been recommended by the Commission is the introduction of not only the DPA arrangements, but also further requirements that will force companies to create anti-corruption programs to prevent bribes being paid. And that is the insertion of an adequate procedures type of approach. They've criminalized companies that allow corruption to happen. And I think that's quite an important innovation for listeners to be aware of.
Stephen Powell, thank you very, very much indeed, Director of Forensics at ENS Africa.